She's back! Tiffany Hayes will re-sign with the Golden State Valkyries, and yes, this is great news. On top of signing Gabby Williams, we get another well-rounded veteran that already has experience with the Valkyries coming back to the team. From what we know right now, it is a one-year deal. They haven't released any numbers yet, but I'm guessing it's going to be closer to a Natasha Cloud contract, maybe a little bit lower than the max. Tip is 36. She did play that 1 year with Vegas where she won the 6th Player of the Year award, and she averaged just under 12 points, about 4 rebounds, 3 assists before a knee injury took her out for the season. But for an expansion team, this is a pretty good sign of faith here. Helped to lay the foundation with the Valkyries, and now she's back in year 2 to help them out some more. Now I do think this is going to be centered around a Gabby Williams, and they're sprinkling in a lot of international players. But Tip will be somebody they trust either starting or off the bench. I can see that role fluctuating with her depending on how Coach Nakase just sees it all. Alright, and because we're in the contract mood, let's show some love to Aliyah Boston, who signed a 4-year, $6.3 million super max contract with the Indiana Fever. Get your bag. So this is basically an extension. She'll get a raise and then have those 3 years at a super max, almost getting what A'ja Wilson got, but you know, we'll never know those little intricate details in the contract. I like this for Indiana. They're showing that's their player for the long haul. They're probably planning to keep her for the entirety of her career. So I love this for Aliyah Boston. I think it's a great move for the Fever, just solidifying who's there, especially knowing Kelsey Mitchell's on a 1-year contract. They'll probably try to do the same with Caitlin Clark. Just peeking at their training camp roster, they obviously have Aliyah Boston, Monique Billings, Caitlin Clark, Sophie Cunningham, Ty Harris, Maisha Hines-Allen, Lexi Hall, Raven Johnson, Megan McConnell, Kelsey Mitchell. And while they do have a pretty heavy roster right now, like a lot of teams, they'll make a handful of cuts before opening day with this training camp roster. And they won't make as many as other teams, but they definitely have some decisions to make. But on top of that, they don't have a lot of long-term players signed. They pretty much have Monique Billings, Lexi Hall, Aliyah Boston, and Caitlin Clark, who they'll probably try to get to sign an extension before 2027, which is the main reason it's a good move. The Fever are starting again to just solidify that core. Hopefully they can get Kelsey Mitchell on a deal that's longer than a year in the near future, because it's going to be similar to this for the next couple of years if players keep signing these short-term deals. And then we briefly touched on Natasha Cloud before, but she's still not signed. It's becoming more and more clear something is happening behind the scenes, and there's some talk about teams not needing a true point guard while at the same time praising somebody like Olivia Miles. So I definitely don't think it's her skill set or her scouting report. Players will report to training camp tomorrow on the 19th. So unless it's going to be a late signing, this is some pretty bad news for Natasha Cloud. Again, they signed Tiffany Hayes, a late signing as far as free agency, but before training camp starts. Hopefully there's a team, you know, bold enough to bring her on. If nothing else, as a veteran presence. I mean, you think about these expansion teams, they could definitely use somebody like Natasha Cloud. It's gonna suck still, because the longer they've waited, the less she's probably gonna get, just being desperate to sign. Hopefully this doesn't mean we've seen the last of her. She'll probably still stay in Unrivaled and things like that, but this is most definitely a player that should be on a roster at this point. Alright, and then just peeking at some of the training camp rosters, again, we know there are going to be some cuts made. The teams can have a 12-player roster and then have 2 developmental slots, and you can look at a team like the Sky as a great example. There are obviously some names that are going to make it to the floor. They have 19 players going into training camp, so that's at least 5 players that they're going to cut, maybe someone else that they waive. They might leave room on the roster for other things. These teams can literally decide on the fly what to do at training camp. Now, a team like the Connecticut Sun aren't as heavily loaded, but they're still sitting with around 17 players. So that's still 3 players that'll get cut or waived and either get shuffled around the league or hope there's a team in need after the season starts. Then you have a team like the Washington Mystics, who are not only heavily loaded as far as how many players are on the roster, but they have a lot of great players. They're sitting around 18, and you're looking at your number 4 pick in Lauren Betts, Rory Harmon, Shakira Austin, Michaela Onyenware. Like, these are going to be some tough decisions once you get to it. I mean, there are some names you probably haven't readily seen, so you can assume, okay, that person's getting cut. Especially a team like the Toronto Tempo. They've got 19 players. So even with developmental spots, there are 5 players that aren't even going to get to suit up here. And it's going to be heartbreaking. Again, those players have to figure out how to shuffle around the league or just wait until they're lucky enough to get a slot. Now, technically, the number of roster spots spots has increased. It's a no-brainer. 2 extra teams, 2 extra roster spots, but there are still going to be players on the fringes. There might even be unsigned players that skip the line once all this clears out. And in all fairness, for the most part, you can probably pick out your starters. You can pick out your bench. You can pick out that third string backup, and then you're left with a lot of players on the fringes. As you can see, looking at a team like the Wings, they've got over 20 players. So on top of tough decisions, they'll probably end up on some reserve contracts, some suspended contracts. You may see some international players go back overseas just to wait out the situation, especially if the Wings are determined to keep their rights. I think this is a great team to highlight because they went very hard in free agency, picking up certified roster slots. Elena Smith, Jessica Shepard, going back and finding a Awak Kuir, Maddie Seegers, your main guards in Paige Beckers, Arike Gumbawale, and now AZ Fudd. So we may see some mainstays. We may see some names we've barely heard of. And to go into training camp, you have someone like Cheyenne Sellers who's just happy to be in a jersey, even a training camp jersey, but that doesn't guarantee she'll hit the floor. And if most teams are dealing with the same problem, I can't say she'll be out there in a different jersey. And then you can look at a team like the Sparks here, who are pretty well-rounded in what they look like they're building and what they're trying to do for this upcoming season, sitting just over the 14 roster spot limit. So they'll have 1 cut to make, maybe 2, depending on how they want to go into the season with a little bit of room or lack thereof. But this will be one of the least heartbroken teams. It won't be a lot leaving this roster, but you're pretty steady here. Nneka Ogwumike, De'Erica Hamby, Kelsey Plum, Ariel Atkins. And just to briefly speak on Ariel Atkins, that sign and trade with Chicago was some great finessing, man. I could be alone in thinking she was overpaid, but they paid Ariel Atkins and then essentially traded her just for the value that was on that contract. So no, I do not think the Sparks are getting that value back, but hey, they made it happen. So you also have Ray Burrell, Erica Wheeler, Cameron Brink. So I think this is a pretty solid team, especially going into training camp, and they probably won't change as much as the other teams out there. And then the Golden State Valkyries, a team sitting with over 20 players on the roster. So again, lots of cuts here. We do know Tiffany Hayes signed for a year. The details of her contract weren't out while I was recording, but they were released as I was editing, and it looks like she signed a 1-year $600,000 contract. I thought she would get closer to $800,000-$900,000, but this could have been waiting too long in free agency or seeing if someone would offer her closer to the max, and then this probably ended up being the best contract on the table this late into free agency. The Valkyries are more than likely going to build around your Gabby Williams, but they were able to re-sign Caitlin Chen, Letitia Amahir, who did great work for them. This will be our first time getting a look at Jositi on this side, and then they were able to re-sign Kayla Thornton and Kyla Charles, who I think was probably one of their best breakouts last year, even though she came in on the tail end. They're still working through their international players, Elania Rupert, Janelle Salon, and Cecilia Zandalicini. So this will be another team with some pretty heartbreaking cuts, but hopefully whoever we see take the floor on opening night is ready to fight, right? The Minnesota Lynx, for a team that let so many players go into free agency, they're sitting with over 20 players themselves. So this is another team that's going to have a lot to decide just over the next couple of days before opening day actually is upon us. And for the most part, there's another team where, you know, a handful of players will still be here. Courtney Williams, Nafisa Collier, Kayla McBride. But I'm not really sure how they're going to fill out the rest of the roster or even those development players for that matter. They might spend it on a rookie, but we know Olivia Miles will be active on the floor. So, and that's the biggest thing with all the teams. Honestly, it's not a lot to iron out until we know who they've cut from these training camp rosters. And as they're trickling in, we like to see everybody get their bag. I'm happy for the players that are signed. And on top of still hoping to hear about Natasha Cloud, we still have our ears to the ground for Kehlani Brown, Tina Charles, Bree Hall, Bria Hartley, Tiara McCowan, and Ariel Powers. The season's shaping up to be a good one.
Don't forget to like and subscribe, players.